Coming up on the program, why this bridge is leading to a diplomatic showdown between India and China. And this Ethiopian opposition member is going to jail for 6.5 years, all because of a Facebook post. India is working on a number of massive infrastructure projects so that it can mobilize tanks and troops to its border. You'd be forgiven for wrongly assuming that this is another chapter in the country's ongoing dispute with Pakistan. Instead, as one retired Indian general put it, we need to be ready in case the Chinese attack. At issue is the far eastern region of Arunachal Pradesh. China has another name for it, Southern Tibet. And India wants to ensure that name never becomes official. It's built the country's longest bridge to the area and is also upgrading highways and landing strips. So why now? And is India being reckless? We'll have that debate in a moment, but first Sandra Gatman starts off with this report.
Welcome to India's longest bridge, a new source of pride for the country's leadership, who've tried for years to build up infrastructure in the region. The Dola Sadia Bridge stretches 9.1 kilometers, connecting Assam and Arunachal Pradesh in the Himalayas. But there's one problem. India's frontier state is partly claimed by China. And it's not just the bridge's location that sparked concern in Beijing. It's also designed to carry heavy tanks and transport troops. There are plans, too, to upgrade military landing strips, adding to India's fast-growing defenses on the border. India's junior home minister recently said, with China getting more and more aggressive, it is time we strengthened our physical infrastructure to defend our territory. The region which China calls South Tibet has been a source of confrontation for years. The latest spat with India erupted last month when the Dalai Lama visited Arunachal Pradesh against Chinese pressure to shun the Tibetan spiritual leader. But tensions have extended beyond the border. In the world of business, China is planning a $50 billion economic corridor in Pakistan, which a UN body has warned might create geopolitical tension with India. India recently banned China from investing in its electric power grids. Add to that a heated space race between the two nations, taking the contest for regional dominance to even greater heights. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New Delhi is S. Kalyanaraman. He's a research fellow at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. And from Beijing, Einar Tangen. He's an analyst on China and international politics. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start in New Delhi with S. Kalyanaraman. This bridge, is it a good idea?
Thank you. The bridge is essentially an economic project. It is not anywhere less, it's greater than 100 kilometers away from the border. It was conceived of as an economic project to connect this Brahmaputra, two sides of the Brahmaputra. It has no military implications in the direct sense of the word. It was essentially meant to enhance connectivity in the Northeast, which is one of the most poorly connected regions of India. It's poorly connected at three different levels. First, within the region of the Northeast, which consists of 7 states, and connectivity between the Northeast region and the rest of India, and finally connectivity between India and Bangladesh and Myanmar, which abut the Northeast. So to that extent, essentially, I would see this bridge as part of a connectivity project meant to increase economic potential of the region. However, let me also add that
yes,
it definitely, any such project enhances the ability of the Indian military to move its forces towards the border.
Okay.
So to that extent, yes, it is important. But the bridge alone is unlikely to fundamentally transform the military balance along the border.
Okay, we know where you stand on that. So Einar Tangen, what we're hearing from New Delhi is that the bridge is essentially fundamentally economic in nature. So what's China's problem?
quite frankly, China's problem is the fact that the Indian Defense Ministry has said, quite frankly, that they want to move 60-ton tanks along there, that it enhances the movement of troops. And this is their own words, so I don't necessarily know that anyone's buying this. You take this in connection with the upgrading of airports to be able to handle heavy transport, and statements, again, by the Ministry of Defense saying that these are necessary upgrades in order to be ready for a battle with China. As you mentioned in the beginning of this broadcast, a former general of India has indicated that they need to be prepared for a war with China. So very difficult to understand exactly what all this talk about, oh, it's just a necessary economic tie. If you want to go into the details of what this represents and start looking at the actual policies that they have been pushing in that area, they're all pretty much based on this idea that private enterprise and investment is going to come into this area. Very difficult to see when there's a political question involving war involved.
Okay, so Mr. Tangen, can it be both? Because we're seeing that the bridge will cut the distance and travel time between Assam and Arunachal Pradesh by 165 kilometers and 5 hours. So can't it be both? Can't they be sort of hedging it a little bit? We have defense and we have economy. We kill two birds with one stone. Do you accept that?
Absolutely. Every country has the right to try to improve the lot, but this is an area. This is an area where people have had ongoing disputes. There's obviously no secret to the fact that China and India both claim this area, as you started out this broadcast with. And the fact is that there seems to be no desire on behalf of Delhi to actually sit down at the table, despite offers from China. So from this particular vantage point, no, it does not seem like a very helpful way of doing this. There's a kind of hot and cold wind. Right. On the other hand, Delhi did announce just recently that they are abandoning their planned troop deployment, what do you call it, trials with Australia and the United States. It's not clear where New Delhi is going on this.
Okay, so S. Kalyanaraman, and I know there's a bit of a delay in my words getting to you, so bear with me before you answer. Let me just finish the question here, right? So we have India's Junior Home Minister, Kiran Rijiju, who's from Arunachal Pradesh, saying, and I'm going to quote the Junior Home Minister, "With China getting more and more aggressive, it is time we strengthened our physical infrastructure to defend our territory." That's all about defense. That's all about establishing facts on the ground, especially since the Chinese consider it disputed. That says nothing about economy. You would accept why the Chinese are worried, wouldn't you?
Firstly, on the issue of tanks being moved to that border, now the fact is that particular border, the bridge and the sector to which it provides access is absolutely not suitable for armored warfare. If at all tanks are going to be used, I do take the point that the media, in fact, has been highlighting this particular aspect. But you cannot use tanks in that particular sector. You can use it in Ladakh, you can use it along the Sikkim border, but not in the Arunachal border because the terrain simply does not permit it. Now, coming back to your question about China's, I think the threat perception about China is not something that is very new. In fact, the tremendous infrastructure development that China has put in place in Tibet since the early 2000s woke up India, because there is a huge contrast between the state of development of the air, rail, and road networks in Tibet and the feeder roads that come all the way to the border. And in contrast, on this side of the border, there is such an utter lack of roads and rail networks. So the strategic roads program that India initiated in 2006, it envisaged constructing 73 different roads along the India-China border. And as on today, it's 10 years later, you have only 21 of these have been completed. There's a whole series of reasons for the delay. There's this issue of monsoons between April and October, which essentially does not permit work to be done. There's, of course, lack of adequate project management capabilities. And also, I think the hill ranges in this region, they're very new, relatively speaking, and they're still not stabilized. And the looseness of the soil also in many ways affects the pace of the work. So while it is right that there is a defense element, but I think this particular bridge, the strategic roads program, is something that is supposed to happen along the border, closer to the border, not 100, 150 kilometers away from the border. So to that extent, this bridge is not a part of the strategic roads program, but essentially aimed at improving connectivity in this particular part.
Okay, Aina Tangan, that sounded quite compelling. Firstly, China started all of this. They've been building all the infrastructure on their side of the border for decades, while India has done nothing. It's only natural for them to, I guess, upgrade their facilities. And secondly, this is not suited. It's not suitable for the type of military tanks and so on that the Chinese fear. And it's not even very close to the border. Aren't you convinced by any of that?
Unfortunately not. As you pointed out, the ministry and defense sources are saying exactly the same thing, that they plan to use this as part of a military response to a growing, what they perceive as China threat. Now, let's take a look at this issue about what China has done in Tibet. In Tibet, prior to China being there, the life expectancy was 42 years old. That was an adult male, average female as well. So today, yes, things have changed quite a bit in Tibet, but mostly for the best. You start seeing the massive amount of economic aid that has gone into there. It's transformed it. The tourism opportunities have more than 100-fold. You have areas which are now protected, which were once wild. You have people who can own land as opposed to being serfs. So yes, China did invest in that area, but it was to stabilize it and to bring to that area the kind of economic progress that China has enjoyed.
So we have not seen the same thing from India. Why shouldn't India start doing the same on their side of the border? Even though this narrative, narrative is disputed, why shouldn't India start by building a beautiful bridge?
Absolutely. And if they built the bridge, and they were talking about there are 3 different policies of look east, industrialization, etc., this would be perfectly legitimate. But as you have mentioned and quoted, this was not the reaction of Delhi. They sent out these words that they plan to use this for military. If you start looking at the network of roads and bridges, these are not reaching into the heartland of creating an economic miracle. It is merely strategic in order to get tanks and armories to these particular borders.
Right.
So it does not fit when the rhetoric does not fit the reality.
Okay. Mr. Tangan, what's China going to do? They're not going to bomb the bridge, are they? Nobody wants 2.5 billion people going to war, especially 2 nuclear-armed countries. So what is China going to do right now? It's upset, but how's it going to react?
Well, it's reacted in typical fashion. It said, please consider carefully what you're doing. I mean, these kinds of provocative words coming from India, from Delhi, seem kind of unwarranted. This is a time when China is trying to move its Belt and Road Initiative, which they hope will be a win-win situation for all those involved. And what you have coming from India is this idea that we want to be able to move troops as quickly as possible in the event of a war. So very, very mixed messages coming out of Delhi. I think at this point, it would be better for these 2 nations, civilization nations, who enjoy a common heritage, a border, many, many aspects of their culture, should be working together. They are, in fact, mirror images. As China is growing older, India is growing younger. 60% of the people are under 30 years old. This should be a match made in heaven instead of one of potential world conflagration of war.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, I've got to wrap. It's been very enjoyable talking to both of you, S. Kalyanaraman and Einar Tangan. Thank you very much for joining us.